best in radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. It's Kerry, Lutz, and with Elan Journo. You know, he's been on here before, fellow and director of policy research at the Ayn Rand Institute. And as you know, it's been 13 years since 9/11. The failures of American foreign policy well documented. And if you've picked up a newspaper lately, you know all about them. Just have to look at this group, ISIS, their rapid rise, and the inability of the U.S. and the rest of the world to effectively deal with this group. Nobody really knows what to do about it. And looking at it through that lens, Elan, thanks for coming back, and good to talk with you.
Thanks for having me.
So this group, ISIS, seems to be about the most barbaric, inhuman group. I mean, they seem to be the reincarnation, the resurrection of Genghis Khan here.
Yes, when some groups within Al-Qaeda are frowning at what ISIS is doing, you know that they're outdoing even the Taliban. If people remember the Taliban, before 2001, they were in power in Afghanistan, and they were doing horrendous things to people, like knocking a wall down upon someone as a way of executing them and stoning people to death. Now, ISIS is outdoing even that by crucifying people and savagely killing them all over the place.
Yeah, and blowing up archaeological ruins and significant archaeological monuments in the name of Islam. It's just reprehensible. And the Taliban had done that, blew up some Buddhist monuments right before 9/11. It's what reminded me of it. And, you know, you got to wonder what's going through these people's minds to engage in that kind of activity.
I think it's illustrative of what animates them, and this is one of the lessons we have yet to learn since 9/11, which is that as these groups tell us, as these groups show us in their actions, they're motivated by their belief that the world needs to be ruled under the law of Allah and his religion. And we can dispute and argue over how many people believe that, but these particular Muslims do believe it, and they're acting on that belief. And this is the essence of the enemy. The enemy is an Islamist movement. They believe that the way to bring back justice to the world is to make everyone subjugated under the law of Sharia, which is Islamic law. And so it's no surprise that they find Buddhist statues or other religious icons or even archaeological finds from other eras. Those are non-Islamic. They're infidel. They're against Allah. So they have to be destroyed, just as people who refuse to bow to Allah's law should be killed if they don't convert. So that has a long legacy in Islam, where conquerors give the option to those they've taken either to die or to convert. But those are the options. And in fact, what we're seeing in ISIS is we can think of them as medieval, but really they're just adapting what they regard as the model of Muhammad and his conquests hundreds of years ago to the present day. Now, I call this the Islamist movement because it includes many, many factions and groups, and they disagree among each other. But what they have in common in groups like Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah and Hamas and ISIS, what they have in common is that they want rule under religious Islamic law. And that is an important way to understand them, because we've bounced around this issue for so long, and we've crippled ourselves by not understanding what they're doing and apologizing for it and pretending that they're doing something other than that.
Yeah, and you look at Obama and John Kerry, that they're going to somehow negotiate with these people, have a peace with them. peaceful coexistence, that Israel can somehow fit into this equation. And it's totally unrealistic. It can't happen, not in their view of the world, can it?
No, I mean, think of it this way. Suppose you go for a picnic in the forest and a bear comes and attacks your picnic. Do you try to negotiate with the bear? Well, obviously not. I mean, that would be silly. We don't think of bears as open to persuasion. And my point is not that these Islamists are animals like a bear, but the point is they're not open to rational persuasion in the way that we think that everyone in politics in the West is. They're not. They're interested in asserting their goals by force and killing as many people as they have to and goading us into conflict and just beating their chests, lapping up blood in the way that is subhuman. So the idea that you might treat these groups as, in fact, civilized is a mockery.
Yeah, and do you think it's just a question of extremes from one group to the next, or are they all basically the same?
Well, I think it's not helpful to categorize groups in the Islamist movement as more or less extreme. I think what unites them is a common goal. The question is that they differ on tactics and on some points of detail on ideology, but they don't differ on the goal. And I don't know how you separate out these two examples. Hamas in the Gaza Strip, which is an Islamist group, uses women and children as human shields, and ISIS, which beheads people. I mean, I don't know how you create a yardstick for measuring barbarity. I think those are both barbarous, and at a certain point, there's no way to find gradations. The whole premise of this movement of inflicting religious dictatorship or totalitarianism under Allah's law, that is beyond the pale. It's abhorrent, and no one should even think of finding better or worse among them. To the extent any group is committed to that goal, is irredeemable.
Right. And when you go back and you look at, and this isn't new, right? Their goal is not new. It's been around for a long time. Churchill dealt with it. I mean, been dealing with this for hundreds of years now and never really come up with a good way of confronting it. The West really hasn't, has it?
In a certain sense, it has been around for hundreds of years. As I suggested, it is modeled after Muhammad and his successors' conquest and the empire that they built, sort of a kind of imperialism. But there is something distinctive to the current form we're seeing, which is it's a 20th century version of it. And what makes it really deadly and dangerous is not that it's inherently powerful. So that it's not an industrial power like the Soviet Union, which had its armies and military machine and its own weapons. They don't have any of that. I mean, they have weapons, but they're not an industrial power of that scale. What makes it deadly is that, to a large extent, it is the West's appeasement and failure to assert its own self-interest for the last 50-odd years in the Middle East. And its appeasement specifically of Islamist groups leading up to 9/11 and since that has made these groups feel emboldened to the point where they feel they can kill Americans with impunity. Because, in fact, Americans have been killed by Islamists with impunity for years, and that is a lesson well learned. We have encouraged them through our passivity and inaction and our failure to recognize who they are and when we had the chance to destroy them. So in a certain way, materially, they're much weaker than other enemies we faced in history, militarily, in all the dimensions you could measure under that heading. But in terms of their confidence, their morale, even the Taliban, which has been decimated, has higher morale than they should rightly have. Why do they do that? Well, because we've shown them that we don't put our foot down, that we don't assert ourselves, and in fact, we're much more inclined to make ourselves into a welcome mat for them to walk all over. And that's been going on for decades, and that I've been arguing was one reason 9/11 happened, is that we had been earning the contempt of the Middle East through our appeasement of it, and that we encouraged greater aggression as a result.
So here's the question, Elan. Is ISIS really a wake-up call then?
I regard it as this is the tail end of the Iraq War. So as some of your listeners might know, ISIS originated as one of the insurgent groups within Iraq, and it was scattered off and it went into Syria and came back even stronger. I regard it as the tail end of the war because there's a lot of things wrong with the Iraq War, but one of the things that we should have done for sure was deal justice to those who were killing American soldiers. All those insurgents were murdering our young men and women. We didn't even do that. In fact, we paid off a lot of insurgents, armed them. And so, in effect, ISIS is now the chickens coming home to roost. That we made a problem really bad as a result of failing to destroy the insurgents in Iraq. And now they're coming back. They've learned a lot. They're better than they used to be than 7-8 years ago during the height of the insurgency. And here it is. This is the unfinished business from that conflict rearing its head. So, I think we have to recognize that, and this is one of the things I talk about in my book, Winning the Unwinnable Wars. Iraq is touted as a success, but it was a huge failure that people have not yet come to appreciate.
Yeah, and the failure crosses parties, and it crosses ideologies. And up next, we'll be talking about that on the Financial Survival Network.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
People have been using gold and silver to protect their wealth for thousands of years. Shouldn't you? That's why I go to Cloud Hard Assets. Tom Cloud has been in the business for 38 years. Call him now at 800-247-2812. Tom's service is outstanding, and you can buy with complete confidence. Order today, and you'll have your metal in your hands in 10 days or less. Tom takes the guesswork out of what to buy, and you'll buy at the lowest possible prices. And as a special to FSN listeners, you'll get free shipping and insurance. So call Tom today at 800-247-2812. That's 800-247-2812, or find him on the web at cloudhardassets.com and tell him Kerry sent you.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
In case you just joined us, we're with Elan Journo of the Ayn Rand Institute. We're talking about the failures of American policy in combating Islamicism, and it's been a Republican and a Democratic failure. Republicans, Elan, through George Bush, we're just going to solve the problem by making the Middle East democratic, and we saw how well that worked in Egypt, right?
Yeah, the Bush doctrine of bringing democracy and elections to the Middle East energized a lot of the Islamists. Even before Egypt, a couple of years ago when the Islamists came to power, we saw the same thing happening in the Gaza Strip and even in Iraq. So in Gaza, it was Hamas that won by a margin that we should call a landslide. And in Iraq, where we were still having troops on the ground, it was the Iranian-backed groups that came to power and, in effect, made Iraq a satellite of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So where we encouraged these elections under Bush, we ushered in the worst of the worst in that respect. And then it was quickly curtailed, if you remember, after the embarrassment in the Gaza Strip with Hamas rising to power. So, yes, we definitely saw that. And then what happened in Egypt, it speaks to the basic cause, which is what happens when you give people the vote. They vote their conscience. They vote the ideas they follow. And in Egypt, a lot of people, enough of them voted for the Islamists. There was enough of a established and entrenched community that backed them, and that was the result. So it should not be seen as a protest vote, and it should not be excused as these Islamists were the best organized. Yes, they were, but that's partly because they have wide and deep support.
Yeah. So what is the solution here? You just have to have a strong man to keep these Islamists in check? Is that the solution?
I wouldn't think of it as the ideal solution. It's arguably it's a lesser evil, but it's still an evil. And if one were to do something like that, one would have to deal with it as an evil and not pretend, as we did in Egypt with Hosni Mubarak for decades, that, oh, he's a great guy, he's our friend, and, pat him on the back, invite him to the White House and vacation with him. That is wrong too. So if you're in a bind where you feel like the only option is to have a kind of buffer like that, you have to recognize its moral character and say something like, look, this is the least worst option we can support. We don't like you, and we're waiting for someone better to come along. And being that open and upfront, it delegitimizes the strong man, even while encouraging those who have better ideas and truly want freedom, with the knowledge that, if they can prove themselves, we would rather have them in power. So it's not a good solution, and not a long-term solution, but I can see the definite advantages in the short term to having it, because it means that Islamists are not in power. So that's definitely an advantage.
Yeah, because once the Islamists get in power, then we're really in trouble, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, let's be frank. None of the dictators who were pushed out of power were particularly wholesome or friendly in reality, but they were the lesser of the two. And I repeat, it's not that we think they were good; it's that they were lesser evils, and they were still evil. I mean, Hosni Mubarak did horrendous things to the Egyptians, and it was no surprise that a lot of them hated him. But if you're looking at it from the perspective of what is the lesser threat to us? Well, the lesser threat to us is a dictator who's really busy trying to stay in power and preventing Islamists from taking control of the military.
Yeah. That's for sure. And even looking at what's happening in Libya now, as evil as Gaddafi was, it's better than having a failed state and having other radicals taking over and anarchy and all sorts of bad things happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult position to be in, and I just want to make clear, it's not that there's any love for dictators or that we should support them or prevent them from falling out of power, but it's the recognition that there is something distinctively more dangerous about an ideologically committed enemy than there is to a non-ideological enemy, like Hosni Mubarak, who was essentially just a strongman. So, not a fan of his. I don't really want him back, but I don't want the Islamists either. And I think the wider point which you're raising is this speaks to the state of the Middle East politically, which is there are very few good actors and very few political groups that we could have anything to do with or that we should even consider supporting. And what is true and is underappreciated is that amid all of these nasty groups and leaders and monarchs and authoritarians, there is one ally that if we were to back somebody, it should be Israel, which is a basically free country and could be a bulwark against some of these forces if we figure out a good way to have a relationship with that regime instead of knuckling down on it. So there's an interesting line of thought in terms of how can we better use that alliance with Israel than we have done, treat it as an asset, not a liability, and use that as a way to ensure our interest in the region, given that there are no good actors in these other countries. We don't really want the dictators back. We don't really want the Islamists, for sure.
Yeah, there's no real good options. But yeah, Israel's certainly the freest country, and most in line or aligned with the U.S. is for certain, and for all the kowtowing and trying to further ingratiate ourselves with all the various Arab and Muslim states over the past post-World War II era, it doesn't seem to have really bought the U.S. much of anything and accomplished very much, has it?
No, and you're raising an excellent point, which is if you look at the sweep of history and American policy in the region, it's hard to argue that there's any kind of coherence. I would go further and say that it is incoherent, and that goes to explain why we were so appeasing towards the region and towards all the dictators who nationalized American and Western interests, and towards Islamists who killed Americans and fomented terror attacks all over the place. There was really no clear conception of what our goals are, nor the moral courage to stand up for our own interests. So we neither had an idea of what we should be doing, and my answer to that is, should we be protecting the lives and freedom of Americans, period, nor the confidence that we have a moral right to do that. And we do, but we don't believe that we do. So what you have is an enormously powerful country, a giant of the scale the world has never seen militarily, behaving as if it has a self-esteem problem and appeasing people who are much weaker than we are, encouraging them and encouraging the worst among them, and as a result, not really achieving our own interests or securing the lives of Americans. So we have this real conflict between the material strength that we obviously have and the absence of moral strength, which we need to have and don't. And that's one of the themes of my book, which is America needs to straighten its spine, and it has a right to do that. But Americans and our leaders and policymakers don't realize that. They don't believe it. They're the ones who are crippling our attempts to form rational policies, long-term integrated, coherent policies that would serve to deter people all over the world without our having to do a great deal to use our military. So there's a huge advantage in having a coherent policy, which is exactly what we don't have. We have kind of a real chaos, which is just multiplying by the day.
Yeah, our policy really changes with the weather. It really does. It's unpredictable. And just the nature of having an unpredictable policy in the Middle East introduces further unpredictability and instability, which you're seeing right now. And I would assert is a major cause of the chaos that's sweeping the region now. And on that note, we kind of have to wrap up. Just tell us where we find you, your blog, and interviews on the Ayn Rand Institute website.
Yeah, if people Google Ayn Rand, AYNRAND, or come to our website, ari.aynrand.org, and they can find all kinds of information about Ayn Rand's own ideas and our application of them to public policy and people's own individual lives.
Excellent. And you'll find the link on our website, financialsurvivalnetwork.com, in the show notes to this interview. Don't forget, sign up for our newsletter. Don't forget, sign up for a free webinar on what the state of gold and investing is coming up on September 24th at 9 p.m. Free webinar. Just have to sign up, click the link on the upper left-hand corner of the homepage. And Elan, thanks so much for coming on again. Always a pleasure, and we will talk with you again soon.
Great. Thank you, Kerry.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.